haunted my childhood and haunt me still. I think they always will. In Texas, April is a spectacularly beautiful month. The meadows are an exuberant wildscape of bluebonnets, orange-red Indian paintbrush, and white prickly poppies, one of those hands-off plants that is defended by so many thorns that even a starving longhorn won't touch it. By the thousands, the tourists congregate in the hill country to warm their winter-chilled bones in the spring sunshine and marvel at the wildflower meadows. And when they've seen enough bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush to last for a while, they drive to Fredericksburg for Bill and Sylvia Varney's annual herb fair, or to Kerrville for the Arts and Crafts Festival, or to Pecan Springs. And while they're hanging around Pecan Springs, they have lunch at Time for Tea and buy lots of pots of herbs and herbal products at Time and Seasons, enough to ensure that April is not just beautiful, it's profitable. You can't beat that. My name is China Bales. I'm the owner of Time and Seasons and the co-owner with Ruby Wilcox of a new tea room called Time for Tea. In April, I'm lucky if I can find enough free time to scrub my teeth and flip a comb through my hair. In addition to the daily work in the shop and the tea room, somebody's got to look after the herb gardens. April showers, definitely a good thing, are guaranteed to bring a fine flowering of May weeds, definitely bad. So the spring battle plan calls for me to show up at the shop around dawn and get started on the day's planting, mulching, and weeding chores. I try to leave by 6 in the evening so I can have dinner with my husband McQuaid and our 13-year-old son Brian. But during the intervening hours, I go at a dead run all day. In fact, April is so wild and woolly that Ruby and I often threaten that one of these years we're going to give ourselves a spring break of our very own. We'll throw our suitcases in the car and drive as far and as fast as we can, away from the tea room and our shops and the gardens, far away from Pecan Springs. Who knows how far we'll go? The still snowy plains of Manitoba, maybe, or the steamy jungles of Mexico, where there are no bluebonnets and no tourists. Ruby Wilcox, 6 feet tall in her sandals, with an unruly mop of curly red hair, a face full of freckles, and an arresting sense of style, is the proprietor of the Crystal Cave, Pecan Springs' only New Age shop. Ruby is also my partner and very best friend. And while she frequently displays certain personal characteristics that can only be called, well, weird, I know I can always count on her to listen when I've got something on my mind. On this bright, breezy morning on the last Tuesday in April, I had something on my mind. Her name is Letha Richards, and she's my mother, although we haven't always been on the best of mother-daughter terms. While Ruby couldn't offer much help, she was willing, as always, to listen. "Letha's gone where?" Ruby sat down on the garden bench, folded her legs under her a la lotus, and closed her eyes. Ruby has taken yoga classes for years and is as foldable as a piece of rice paper. "Mississippi," I said, slowly getting down on my knees. I'm not as supple as Ruby, who can bend straight over and touch her nose to her knees. If you think this is easy, I invite you to try it. I popped a dill seedling out of its plastic six-pack and snuggled it into an open space at the back of the kitchen garden. Dill is not only a tangy culinary herb, fine with fish, zippy in scrambled eggs, and especially famous for what it does to pickles, but it is also useful in repelling witches. Something to keep in mind if you have a problem along those lines. "She's at Jordan's Crossing," I added. "She's been there about 2 months. Ruby opened her eyes. "You don't mean she's left Sam?" she asked, startled. A few years ago, some 15 years after my father's death, my mother married Sam Richards, who owns an exotic game ranch near Kerrville. Exotic as in buffalo, antelope, wild sheep, and wild boar, animals whose bloodlines are almost extinct in the wild. The two of them live on Sam's ranch, which is a far cry from the palatial home in the affluent Houston suburb bequeathed to her by my father. And they seem to be happy together, which has come as some surprise to me. In the beginning, it was hard for me to imagine Letha trading in her hairdresser and beauty spa for a home on the range, but so far it seems to have worked out. I pulled cedar chip mulch around one seating and reached for another. "Aunt Tullie is sick," I said, pushing the trowel into the dirt. "Letha's gone back to the plantation to help out." My grandmother, Rachel Coldwell, died when my mother was born, and Letha was raised by her father Howard and his sister Tullie at Jordan's Crossing, in a plantation house built during the bitter years following the Civil War. Aunt Tullie stayed on at Jordan's Crossing after her brother died in 1963, managing the plantation in the sternly autocratic style of her father and grandfather, keeping the place pretty much as it had been during her parents' lifetimes. Or so Letha told me. I hadn't been back since my early teens. Tullie had to be in her mid-80s now, and while I could not imagine her as anything less than absolute ruler over the kingdom of Jordan's Crossing, it sounded from Letha's report as if she wasn't well. Not dying, exactly, at least not yet, but suffering from some sort of debilitating illness. When the end finally came, Aunt Tullie's death would also be the death of an era that had its roots in the bloodiest period of our nation's past and in the darkest depths of the Coldwell family history. My family history, although I had already and quite deliberately cut the Coldwell connection, leaf, branch, and root, which accounts for the fact that I've had little communication with Aunt Tullie. Except for the obligatory exchange of Christmas and birthday cards, I put my mother's family into a box, closed the lid firmly, and slid it onto a shelf in the back corner of my mind. It's not personal, mind you. After I entered high school and began thinking seriously about such matters, I began to hate the plantation and everything it stood for. I declared that I would no longer imagine myself in any way as a product of the Old South, with its brutal treatment of slaves, its contradictory veneration and exploitation of white women, its utter disregard for the dignity of human life. Like other women of my era, I decided to repudiate the patriarchal past and reinvent myself as a new kind of Southern woman, free to make her own choices, build her own life, write her own personal Declaration of Independence. Ruby adjusted her orange tunic over her silky brown harem pants and closed her eyes again. The morning sun glinted off her bone and bead necklace, an African-style bib affair that made her look like a shaman. "Mississippi in the spring," she sighed softly. "I did that once. Natchez. It was gorgeous. Azaleas, magnolias, live oaks draped with Spanish moss, beautiful antebellum mansions, Greek revival architecture, wide verandas, tall white columns." Her eyes popped open. "I've got it, China. Next year, let's go to your plantation for our spring break. We'll wear white dresses and scarlet O'Hara hats and sit in the shade and sip frosty mint juleps and pretend we're Southern belles with a dozen adoring beaux." "Whoa," I said, clambering to my feet. "You've got the azaleas and magnolias right, but the rest of it's all wrong. For one thing, it's not my plantation, it's Aunt Tullie's. For another, the Mississippi you have in mind is Southern Mississippi, between Natchez and New Orleans. Jordan's Crossing is in the delta of the Yazoo River, too far north for live oaks and Spanish moss. And while the house is definitely antebellum,